Some stories begin with a whisper, others with a storm. This one began with a quiet man and his loyal dog, walking into a town that didn't know it was about to change forever. It was late autumn in the small town of Pine Hollow. The leaves had turned gold and crimson, swirling in the chilly wind that swept down Main Street. Most of the shops were closed for the evening, their windows glowing softly in the fading light. Only the old diner at the corner remained open, its neon sign flickering in the dusk. A stranger walked down the sidewalk, his steps measured and calm. He wore a worn jacket, jeans, and boots that had seen better days. At his side trotted a German shepherd, alert and steady, her coat gleaming even in the dim light. The man's face was unremarkable quiet, almost forgettable, but his eyes missed nothing. He moved with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from a life spent on the edge. The townspeople noticed him, of course. In a place like Pine Hollow, everyone noticed a stranger. Some watched from behind curtains, others whispered to each other as he passed. But the man paid them no mind. He walked with purpose, his dog never straying more than a step from his side. He entered the diner, the bell above the door jingling softly. The waitress, a tired woman named Linda, offered a polite smile. "Evening. Sit wherever you like." The man nodded, choosing a booth near the window. The dog sat at his feet, her eyes scanning the room. Linda brought him a menu, her curiosity piqued. "Passing through?" she asked. He nodded again, just needed a warm meal. Linda smiled, sensing he wasn't one for small talk. She poured him a cup of coffee and left him to his thoughts. But not everyone in Pine Hollow was as welcoming as Linda. At the counter sat two local police officers, Deputy Rick and Officer Mason. They were known around town for their heavy hands and short tempers. They watched the stranger with narrowed eyes, their conversation fading as they sized him up. "Who's that?" Rick muttered, his voice low. Mason shrugged. "Never seen him before. Looks like trouble." Rick grinned, a mean glint in his eye. "Let's find out." They finished their coffee and sauntered over to the stranger's booth, their badges gleaming in the fluorescent light. The diner grew quiet, the other patrons pretending not to watch. "Evening," Rick said, his tone anything but friendly. "We don't get many outsiders around here." "What brings you to Pine Hollow?" The man looked up, his gaze steady. "Just passing through, looking for a place to rest." Mason eyed. "The German shepherd, no dogs allowed in here." "Health code." Linda spoke up from behind the counter. "He's not bothering anyone, Rick." "Leave him be." Rick ignored her. "You got ID, stranger." The man reached into his jacket and handed over a driver's license. Rick studied it, his lips curling in a sneer. "No address, just a name." "John Walker." "That your real name?" John met his gaze, unflinching. "It's the one I use." Mason leaned in, his voice a low threat. "We don't like troublemakers. You and your mutt best keep to yourselves." John's dog bristled, sensing the tension. John placed a calming hand on her head. "We're not looking for trouble." Rick smirked. "Funny thing about trouble, it has a way of finding people who don't belong." The diner was silent, the air thick with unease. Linda shot John an apologetic look, but there was nothing she could do. Rick tossed the license back on the table. "You're on our radar, Walker. Don't give us a reason to make you regret coming here." With that, the officers turned and left, their boots echoing on the linoleum floor. John sipped his coffee, his expression unreadable. His dog relaxed, but her eyes never left the door. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The townspeople whispered, wondering who the stranger was and what kind of trouble he might bring. But no one, not the cops, not the townsfolk, not even Linda, could have guessed the truth about John Walker, or the storm that was about to break over Pine Hollow. The next morning, Pine Hollow woke to a sky heavy with clouds and a sense of unease that seemed to hang in the air. Word of the stranger's arrival had spread quickly. In a town where everyone knew everyone, John Walker and his German shepherd were the talk of every breakfast table and barber shop. John rose early, as was his habit, and took his dog. Her name was Shada, for a walk through the quiet streets. The town was still, the only sounds the crunch of gravel underfoot and the distant call of a crow. Shadow trotted at his side, ears perked, nose twitching as she took in the sense of a new place. As they passed the town square, John noticed a group of teenagers loitering near the old war memorial. They watched him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, whispering behind their hands. John nodded politely, but didn't stop. He made his way to the small grocery store, hoping to pick up supplies. Inside, the owner, Mr. Grady, eyed him warily. "You're the fella from the diner last night," he said, not unkindly. John nodded. "Just passing through. Thought I'd stock up before I head out." Mr. Grady hesitated, then rang up his purchases. "You be careful. Not everyone here is as friendly as they look." John offered a small smile. "I've learned to keep my eyes open." As he left the store, he saw Deputy Rick's patrol car idling across the street. Rick watched him, a smirk on his face, before rolling down the window. "Morning, Walker. Out for a stroll." John kept his tone neutral. "Just getting some groceries." Rick's eyes flicked to Shadow. "You know, we've got leash laws in this town. Wouldn't want your dog causing any trouble." "She's trained," John replied, his voice calm. "She won't be a problem." Rick snorted. "We'll see about that." John walked, unfeeling the weight of the deputy's gaze on his back. He knew the type men who wore their authority like armor, who saw every outsider as a threat. Back at the motel, John unpacked his supplies and fed Shadow. He sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through her fur. "We'll move on soon. Cora, just need a little rest." Shadow licked his hand, her eyes full of trust. But rest would not come easily. That afternoon, as John walked Shadow near the edge of town, a patrol car screeched to a halt beside him. Officer Mason stepped out, his hand resting on his holster. "Got a call about a suspicious man and a dangerous dog," Mason said, his tone mocking. "Guess that's you." John kept his hands visible, his posture relaxed. "We're just walking." Mason circled him, looking for a reason to escalate. "You military, Walker?" "You got that look." John didn't answer. He'd learned long ago that silence was often the best defense. Mason sneered. "You think you're tough? This is our town. You follow our rules." Shadow stood between John and the officer, her body tense but controlled. She didn't bark or growl, she simply watched, ready to act if needed. Mason spat on the ground. "Keep your mutt on a leash. Next time, I won't be so nice." He got back in his car and drove off, leaving John and Shadow alone on the empty road. As the sun set, John returned to the diner for dinner. Linda greeted him with a warm smile. "Rough day?" John shrugged. "I've had worse." She poured him a cup of coffee. Hairy eyes gleamed. "Don't let them get to you, Rick and Mason. They'd like to throw their weight around. Most folks here are good people." John nodded, grateful for her kindness. As he ate, he noticed a young woman sitting alone at the counter, her eyes red from crying. Linda leaned over and whispered, "That's Jenny. Her brother got in trouble with the cops last year. They made his life hell." John's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before: small towns, where power went unchecked, where fear kept people silent. After dinner, John walked Shadow through the quiet streets. He passed the sheriff's office, its windows dark. He wondered how deep the corruption ran, how many people had suffered in silence. Shadow pressed against his leg, sensing his unease. John knelt beside her, scratching behind her ears. "We'll be careful, girl. But we can't turn our backs on people who need help." As they walked back to the motel, John felt the eyes of the town on him. Some were curious, others suspicious, a few hopeful. He knew trouble was coming. He could feel it in the air, as sure as the coming storm. And when it came, he would be ready. The next day dawned gray and cold, a thin drizzle turning the streets of Pine Hollow slick and empty. John Walker rose early, as always, and took Shadow for a run along the edge of town. The German Shepherd moved with silent confidence, her nose twitching at every new scent, her eyes always scanning for danger. As they jogged past the old mill, John noticed a battered pickup parked behind the building. Two men stood beside it, talking in low voices. One of them was Officer Mason. The other, John recognized from the Denora local named Carl, known for his drinking and his temper. John slowed, keeping his distance. But Shadow's ears perked up. She let out a low, almost inaudible growl. John gave her a gentle signal to stay calm, but he watched the men closely. Mason handed Carl a thick envelope, and Carl nodded, glancing around nervously before tucking it into his jacket. John kept moving, not wanting to draw attention, but his mind was racing. He'd seen enough in his life to know a payoff. When he saw one, he made a mental note of the truck's license plate and the time. Back at the motel, John jotted down what he'd seen in a small notebook. He'd learned long ago to trust his instincts and to keep records. Shadow lay at his feet, her head on her paws, but her eyes never left the door. Later that morning, John stopped by the diner for breakfast. Linda greeted him with a smile, but her eyes were worried. "You okay?" she asked quietly. John nodded. "Just keeping my head down." Linda leaned in, her voice low. "Be careful, Rick and Mason. They don't like people asking questions. Last year, a guy from out of town tried to report them for roughing up a teenager. Next thing you know, he's arrested for resisting arrest and run out of town." John's jaw tightened. "Thanks for the warning." As he ate, he noticed Jenny, the young woman from the night before, sitting at the counter again. She glanced at him, then quickly looked away. John finished his meal and left a generous tip, then stepped outside into the drizzle. He was halfway back to the motel when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Jenny, hurrying to catch up. "Wait," she called, breathless. "Can I talk to you?" John nodded, stepping under the awning of a closed shop. Shada sat at his side, watching Jenny with calm curiosity. Jenny hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "I saw you with Mason this morning. You should be careful. He and Rick, they're bad news." John studied her, his voice gentle. "You know them well?" She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "My brother, Tyler, they arrested him last year. Said he was dealing drugs, but he wasn't. They planted stuff in his car. He tried to fight it, but no one believed him. Now he's in jail, and my mom's sick from the stress." John's expression softened. "I'm sorry. That's not right." Jenny wiped her eyes. "You're not like most people who come through here. You're not afraid of them." John shrugged. "I've seen worse." She looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes. "Can you help?" "I don't know what to do." John hesitated. He'd promised himself he wouldn't get involved, that he'd just pass through. But looking at Jenny, he knew he couldn't turn his back. "I'll see what I can do," he said quietly. Jenny nodded relief and fear mingling in her expression. "Thank you." As she hurried away, John felt Shadow press against his leg. He knelt beside her, scratching her ears. "Looks like we're staying a little longer, girl." That afternoon, John visited the town library, using the public computer to look up news articles and court records. He found a pattern arrests, made by Rick and Mason. Always the same charges, always the same outcome. People who spoke out against them seemed to disappear, their lives ruined. John printed out what he could and tucked the papers into his notebook. He knew he needed more proof that would stand up to scrutiny. That evening, as he walked Shadow through the park, he saw Carl the men from the mill arguing with Mason near the playground. Carl's voice was loud, angry. "You said you'd take care of it. Now, people are asking questions." Mason grabbed Carl by the collar, his voice a harsh whisper. "Keep your mouth shut. You want to end up like Tyler?" John watched from the shadows, his mind working. He needed to get Carl alone, to find out what he knew. As night fell, John returned to the motel, his mind racing. He knew he was getting close to something big, something that could bring Rick and Mason down for good, but he also knew the danger was growing. The cops were watching him, waiting for him to slip up. Shadow curled up beside him, her body warm and solid. John stroked her fur, his thoughts heavy. "We're in it now, girl," he whispered. "But we're not backing down." Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. Trouble was coming, and John Walker was ready. The next day, the tension in Pine Hollow was palpable. Word had spread that the stranger was asking questions, and the town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to break. John Walker moved through the streets with quiet purpose, Shadow always at his side, her eyes alert to every movement. John's first stop was the diner. Linda greeted him with a worried look. "You sure you want to be out and about today?" she whispered as she poured his coffee. John nodded. I can't let them scare me off. Linda squeezed his hand. Be careful. As he ate, John noticed Carl sitting alone at a corner table, his hands shaking as he nursed a cup of coffee. John slid into the booth across from him, shadow settling at his feet. Carl looked up, startled. What do you want? John kept his voice low. I saw you with Mason at the mill. I know what's going on. You don't have to be afraid. Carl's eyes darted around the diner. You don't know these guys. They'll ruin you if you cross them. John leaned in, his gaze steady. I've dealt with worse, but they can't hurt everyone if we stand together. You want out? Help? Me? Carla hesitated, then nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Okay, I'll tell you everything. They arranged to meet later that night, away from prying eyes. As John left the diner, he saw Rick and Mason watching from their patrol car, their faces hard. That afternoon, John visited Jenny and her mother. He shared what he'd learned, showing them the records and the pattern of corruption. Jenny's mother wept, hope and fear mingling in her eyes. Can you really stop them? She asked. John nodded. With your help, and Carl's, we can. As dusk fell, John and Shadow made their way to the abandoned barn on the edge of town, where Kara was waiting. Carl handed John a flash drive. It's all, here videos, recordings, everything. Mason and Rick, taking bribes, planting evidence, threatening people. I was part of it, but I can't do it anymore. John took the drive, his gratitude clear. You're doing the right thing. Suddenly, headlights swept across the barn. Rick and Mason's patrol car screeched to a halt, doors flying open. You think you can betray us, Rick shouted, gun drawn. John stepped forward, calm and unafraid. It's over, Rick. I have everything I need. Mason sneered. You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a drifter. John's eyes hardened. You have no idea who I am. Rick lunged, but John moved with lightning speed. In a blur, he disarmed Rick, twisting his arm behind his back and forcing him to the ground. Mason tried to draw his weapon, but Shadow leaped, knocking him off balance and sending his gun skittering across the floor. The barn filled with shouts and the sound of a struggle. Carl cowered in the corner, but John's calm never wavered. He pinned Rick and Mason, his training evident in every move. Who are you? Rick gasped, struggling against John's grip. John leaned close, his voice cold. I'm a Navy SEAL, and I've had enough of bullies like you. The sound of sirens cut through the night. Linda, worried for John's safety, had called the state police. Within minutes, officers stormed the barn, guns drawn. They arrested Rick and Mason, reading them their rights as John and Shadow stepped back, letting the professionals take over. Carl handed the flash drive to the lead detective. It's all there. Everything you need. The detective nodded, his respect for John clear. You did good, son. Jenny and her mother arrived, tears streaming down their faces as they hugged John and Shadow. Thank you, Jenny whispered. You saved us. The town gathered outside the barn, watching as Rick and Mason were led away in handcuffs. For the first time in years, Pine Hollow felt hope. John stood in the shadows, Shadow at his side, his heart pounding with relief and pride. He hadn't come looking for trouble, but he'd found it and he'd faced it head-on. As the crowd cheered, John slipped away, content to let the town celebrate its newfound freedom. But as he walked into the night, he knew his work wasn't done. There were other towns, other people who needed help, and as long as there were bullies in the world, he and Shadow would be there to stand against them. The days that followed brought a new dawn to Pine Hollow. The news of Rick and Mason's arrest spread like wildfire, not just through the town, but across the county. For the first time in years, people walked the streets with their heads held high, no longer afraid of the men who had once ruled with intimidation and fear. The state police investigation, bolstered by Carl's evidence and John's testimony, uncovered years of corruption. Dozens of cases were reopened, and innocent people like Jenny's brother Tyler were finally given a chance at justice. The town council, embarrassed by their own inaction, promised reforms and new oversight for the police department. Linda, the diner waitress, became a local hero for her courage in calling the state police. She was offered a new job as the town's community liaison, helping to rebuild trust between the people and the authorities. Jenny and her mother, once isolated and afraid, found themselves surrounded by neighbors offering support and friendship. As for Carl, he was given a second chance. His cooperation with the investigation earned him leniency, and he began volunteering at the local animal shelter, determined to make amends for his past. But the biggest change was in the spirit of Pine Hollow itself. The townspeople, inspired by John's bravery and Shadow's loyalty, came together to create a safer, kinder community. They organized neighborhood watches, started youth programs, and held town hall meetings where every voice was heard. On the day Tyler was released from jail, the whole town gathered in the square to welcome him home. Jenny hugged John, tears streaming down her face. "We couldn't have done this without you." John smiled, his eyes soft. "You did it yourselves. You just needed someone to remind you how strong you are." The mayor presented John and Shadow with a plaque, honoring them for their courage and service. "You reminded us what it means to stand up for what's right," the mayor said. "You showed us that one person and one loyal dog can make all the difference." John accepted the plaque quietly, his hand resting on Shadow's head. He looked out at the crowd at Linda, Carl, Jenny, Tyler, and all the others whose lives had been changed. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing he had done what he came to do. That evening, as the sun set over Pine Hollow, John packed his few belongings and prepared to move on. He left a note for Linda at the diner, thanking her for her kindness. He stopped by Jenny's house to say goodbye, promising to keep in touch. As he walked out of town, Shadow trotting at his side, John felt the weight of the past lift from his shoulders. He knew there would always be places like Pine Hollow, places where good people needed someone to stand up for them, and he knew he and Shadow would always be ready. He paused at the edge of town, looking back one last time. The lights of Pine Hollow glowed warm and welcoming, a beacon of hope in the darkness. John knelt beside Shadow, scratching her ears. "Ready for our next adventure, girl?" Shadow wagged her tail, her eyes shining with loyalty and love. As they disappeared into the twilight, the people of Pine Hollow watched them go, grateful for the stranger and his dog who had changed their world. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And remember, sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest strength. Sometimes the bravest heroes are the ones who simply refuse to walk away. Because courage isn't about fighting for yourself, it is about standing up for those who can. And sometimes all it takes is one person and one loyal friend to change everything.